Today on Cooking for Novices, focaccia bread. Wish this was smell-o-vision because that is a wonderful, herbally, delicious smell. Now, you could buy something kind of like this at a Make and Mart in a bag that's been sitting there full of chemical preservatives and chemical leaveners, but you can make it at home with actual yeast. It's so easy that it takes about an hour. It's not hard, people. Make bread at home. You will be infinitely rewarded for the deliciousness that is freshly baked bread, and your house will smell like it. Who needs air freshener? So please, come join us today on Cooking for Novices. Bread making. It's not all that hard. You don't need special equipment. You don't even need this lovely stand mixer that I have here, though I would suggest picking one up because they're just so smooth and sleek and will save your muscles and make things quicker. But if you want to knead by hand, that's perfectly optional. I mean, it's not hard. So focaccia bread. Focaccia bread is a yeast-risen dough, and all yeast-risen doughs have 5 common ingredients. That would be flour, water, yeast, sugar, and salt. And yes, salt is very important with any bread. If you don't have salt, you might as well be making cardboard. There's just no flavor there. Flours, you have 3 basic types: pastry, all-purpose, and bread flour. What is the main difference between them all? Well, that's easy. The amount of protein. Now, why does protein make a difference? Well, because there are 2 proteins in wheat called gliadin and glutein, which when combined in the presence of water and mixed, you get the meshy, elasticide substance known as gluten. Yes, gluten. Gluten is what makes it possible to make yeast-risen doughs, because the elastic stretchiness of gluten will trap all the air bubbles, technically CO2 bubbles, of the yeast and allow it to rise. So on your low end of the scale, you have the pastry flours. That's as low protein as you can get. That means it's less gluten developed, which is why they're good for cakes and so on and so forth, because you don't want a chewy cake, because gluten is chewy. On the high end, you have your bread flours. Now, bread flours are high in protein, which means they will develop a high gluten dough. Now, this is great when you're making a French baguette or a pizza dough. That chew is just part of it. But in focaccia bread, we want somewhere in between, and that's when we come to all-purpose flour, which is made from a mix of hard and soft wheats. Thusly, you have a medium protein content. Hard and soft meaning how much protein is in the wheat. So today we are using all-purpose flour for our focaccia dough. How much? I'm going to go ahead and use about 10 ounces or 2 1/4 cups. Now, when making bread dough, there's a little thing called moisture in the air, and flour loves to absorb moisture. So if it's a humid day, you're probably going to end up needing more. And if it's a dry day, maybe a little less. So you always go with the smaller amount. In this case, we're staying 10 1/4. Then your recipe, if you're using a recipe, would normally ask for. So I go ahead with 10 ounces because this particular type can use up to 2 3/4 ounces. So I'm going to go ahead and start with 10 though, because you can always add, but you can't take away. So I'm going to put that here with my log. KitchenAid. Now, you don't have to use a KitchenAid. You just do this all in a normal bowl and go ahead and knead it. It's no problem. I'm using KitchenAid because it's quicker. I have it. It's a wonderful thing. I suggest buying one. Now, what else are we going to go ahead and add? Well, we're going to talk about yeast. Yeast. Now, there are several types of yeast. Cake yeast, which is direct from the brewers. You have your active dry yeast, which most people may have seen, which I don't really like because active dry yeast is made by drying out the yeast so that dead yeast around live yeast. And in order to use it, you have to bloom it first in some warm water and let the dead yeast rinse away, make sure that the guys inside are actually still alive. That's too much hassle for me. So what I like to use is instant yeast. Not rapid rise bread yeast, better for bread machine type. There's a lot of different labels, but basically rapid rise is a lot faster. So why do I like instant yeast? Well, because instant yeast is made a little bit smaller than your standard yeast, so that there are more active live yeast per granule. Not only that, but they're packed with ascorbic acid, vitamin C, so that they get a little boost right out the gate. So they don't need proofing, watering, it can go straight in the bowl. Now, rapid rise yeast is made even smaller with even more ascorbic acid, and they are not so good for bread making because they tend to burn themselves out. Now, this isn't a fast rise, but it's a standard rise because we still want some yeast flavor. Now, using the rapid rise, you almost get no flavor at all. We're gonna go ahead and use a tablespoon of the instant yeast. Just put that right on top. Yes, I know. You may have heard about cooks not putting it right on top, or you know, you got to bloom it and all this. As I said, instant yeast means you don't have to fuss with it. Makes life easier. Just go ahead and use it. Done. Okay, so next, salt. Do not forget your salt. We go ahead and use a teaspoon of salt. As I said, if you forget your salt, you might as well be making cardboard, so don't forget it. So next, we're going to add sucrose, otherwise known as sugar, for the yeast to munch on. You can use dextrose-based sugars like malted barley and stuff, which will give a slower rise. The yeast eat them slower. But since we're going for a normal, fast rise, because we don't want too much yeast flavor, we're going to go with straight up sugar. Now, you could just use white sugar for this recipe, and it's fine, but white sugar has no flavor unless you stick a few vanilla beans in your white sugar container for a couple weeks, and then you'd have vanilla sugar, which is a very nice thing indeed. But that's a different time, because right now we're making focaccia bread, and vanilla with an herbal background, it can work, but I actually prefer a little bit of extra complex sweetness, which I get by using brown sugar. Now, you could, as I said, you could use the white sugar, but what makes the brown sugar different? Well, brown sugar is white sugar, but with the molasses still in it. So this is going to give it a little bit extra sweetness, a little bit extra something in the background of your bread that I definitely think it's worth changing from standard tradition. This is why we make breads at home. Anything at home. When you can break away from the standard recipe, you're going to win. So the last of our 5 basic ingredients is water. Now, water can come from the tap. I'm using the tap water because I'm lazy, let's be honest, but it's probably preferred to go ahead and use nice filtered water or even bottled water. Distilled is the word you're looking for, because the less impurities in the water, the less it's going to both either interfere with our yeast, like chlorine, or add flavors you may not want in your water. Me personally, I haven't found there to be too much chlorine in my water to affect my bread, and I happen to like the taste of my tap, so I go ahead and use tap. The other main important thing to look out for with water is temperature. Now, anything below 100 degrees and the yeast are just going to stay asleep. They're not really going to be active, so obviously you got to go above 100, but you don't want to go above 130 because that's when they die. They call quits, they're dead, done. You're not going to get anything out of them. So you want somewhere around 120 for this application, because you're going to go ahead and use a lot of heat to the flour and other things in this dough. If you're proofing it ahead of time, like with the active dry yeast, about 105 to 110 is the standard norm. But we're going to go ahead and use a little bit hotter to make sure those yeast get going. So we're going to go ahead and put the water straight into the dough. All right. Boom, water. So now that we've combined our 5 basic ingredients in our mixer bowl, what's left? Well, our additions. Now, the additions are what's going to make your different breads. In this case, we're doing focaccia, so we want to go ahead and add herbs. We want to go ahead and add dried herbs, to be specific. Why dried? Well, that's a really good question, because if you're using fresh herbs, they wouldn't stand up to the heat of the hot box or the bruising that would occur by kneading. So you want to go ahead and use dried herbs. They're just a little bit more robust by being dry. Not quite as flavorful, but they will rehydrate with all the steam inside the bread, and it's not going to be as bad as you think. So what kind of herbs are we adding? Well, I have a teaspoon of basil, a teaspoon of oregano, a teaspoon of thyme, a teaspoon of garlic powder, and a few pinches of fresh ground black pepper. If you're using black pepper that comes in a can, don't even bother. That's not pepper. That's just sawdust. In fact, they actually do use some sawdust to kind of bump up the bulk in it. So, yeah. Since we're making this bread at home, you can make whatever flavor profile you want. If you like more garlic, add more garlic powder. If you like less basil, take out some basil. It's really simple. You have control of the ingredients. These are my personal combinations. You don't have to follow it. You can add other things if you want. But this is a great starting point. Go ahead and try this first and see where you are. So, adding the dried herbs, just sprinkle those right on top. The last addition I'm gonna make is the olive oil you see sitting here. Now this is extra virgin. Ignore the label, I'm just reusing the bottle. I have actually no idea what the label says anymore. Yeah, it's just whatever, it's worn off. So, extra virgin olive oil, you're using the good stuff because this at this point is mostly flavor. It does provide some lubrication within the dough, but it's mostly about flavor. So, use the good stuff. I'm gonna go ahead and use 2 tablespoons. There's 1. And 2 tablespoons. Boom. Now, your dough is done. Now that our dough is done, I'm going ahead and use the mixer. Now I'm using the hook attachment. You could use the whisk attachment. Some people prefer it. Or you could go ahead and use a spatula of some sort. You know, something like, you know, one of these puppies. They'll bring your dough together if you're not using a mixer. Now, start slow. You know, flour likes to go everywhere, so I just got this on the first setting. You can see it's coming together. Now that it's kind of come together into a mass, you can go ahead and bump the speed. Now, as you can see, the dough is pretty sticky still, so I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit more flour. All right, we have that half a cup reserved. I've got actually the whole thing of flour. You can use whatever you need. Go ahead and put a little bit in, just to see what it does. Because flour is actually still absorbing moisture from the water in the dough. So, don't get too crazy with it. Don't boost it too high right off the bat. Wait for it to integrate. You can see it's still sticky, so I'm gonna go ahead and turn it off. Put some flour in there. Turn it back on. You have to excuse my finagling. I moved the rig so we can see the bread better. As you can see, this bread is still a little bit wet. Add just a little bit more flour. So you can see it's starting to come together. It's making a ball shape. So you don't want too much more here. So for argument's sake, I mean, we already have the dough getting there, but for argument's sake, I want to go ahead and try kneading. So what you want to do is go ahead and lightly flour your surface. Make sure it's a clean surface. Just go ahead and put the flour down. All right, just enough. We'll go ahead and make sure your hands are nice and floured, otherwise you're going to get sticky. So for kneading, you want to take your dough and just plop it right down. As you can see, this dough is really still pretty sticky, so I'm going to actually need to use a lot more than we originally anticipated. See, even with flour, you get sticky hands. So, I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of flour on top. So, boom. And then all you're going to do is go ahead and flatten out with your heels, like this, right? And then fold it back on itself and push away, push away. Quarter turn, fold it back, push away. Quarter turn, fold it back, push away. You're getting this little rhythm when you're doing it. You don't need to go far, you're just stretching it. You're weaving the 2 proteins together. All right, and that's all you're doing right here. You'd think of it as, you know, mixing elastic, or, you know, not quite making saltwater taffy, but, you know, the same basic process to get our gluten made. As you see, you can start to see how nice and elastically smooth the top is. That's what you're looking for. That's why you don't want to pull too much, because you actually break all the weaving that we've developed. So how do you know when you've got enough gluten? Well, you could take a piece off and stretch it. Now, if we were making pizza dough, we want to make sure that that stays together. Since we're making a softer dough, you just need to make sure that it goes a little bit towards the middle. When it gets thin like that and breaks, that's fine for here. If you were making pizza dough, as I said, you want it to actually still hold together. So This is enough gluten. So go ahead and turn your dough into a nice ball, kind of crimp it down here at the bottom. All right. And then just kind of between the two hands, so it's nice and smooth, as smooth as you can get it. And what you want to do is put it in a stainless steel bowl. Something where it can rise in. This is, as you can see, about appropriate size. Go ahead and use a little bit more of your extra virgin olive oil, because this is mostly for grease. Just a little bit here. You don't want to overdo it. The grease, it's greasing the pan is what this is doing. Make sure it doesn't stick and to help retain moisture. And then if the dough ball doesn't want to flip because it's super sticky, just go ahead and use your hands. You want to coat it both sides and then back to the side that was on the bottom because you want a smooth surface to help trap that gas from the yeast. So then you want to go ahead and use a piece of saran wrap. Put it right on top. Now don't seal it off. As I said, we've got expanding gases, but you want to put it over top so the surface of the bread doesn't dry out because, oh, that's no good. So that's on there. Now if you left this in your house, that'd be fine just like that. I want to go ahead and put it outside because it's extra warm out today, so I'm going to get a really nice fast rise from out there instead of where the air conditioning can blow on it and cool it off in here. So it's a great way to rise it in the summers, air conditioning outside, warm outside. You're going to want to go ahead, put a towel over it. Now, this is going to keep any direct sunlight, interested critters, whatever might be around you, out of your bowl. So I'm going to go ahead and put this outside, let it raise for anywhere from 20 minutes to 45. I'm going to go ahead and put this outside. All right, so while your dough is rising, you want to go ahead and preheat your oven. Now you don't need a stone in there like I did, just from a local hardware store. I like to also use it for pizza, but since mine is a smaller oven, it's hard for it to hold heat retention. So I like to go ahead and use this as a heat sink pretty much at all times. So what temperature? Well, I like 40 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Since mine is in Celsius, it only goes 210 to 250, go ahead and use the 250, which is about 480 Fahrenheit, which is still fine. So, half hour later, and our dough is well risen. Magic of yeast. So go ahead and peel off your plastic. Now you can go ahead and use non-stick spray if you worry about it. I find that nice aluminum pans with a nice finish, like so, tend not to have too much for the bread to stick to, so I don't even bother. Where's the best place to find a pan? Why, at your local restaurant supply store, of course. Here in Tokyo, I have a whole street. You can find one closest to you via the internet. Inside is a whole cornucopia of cookware. For the American ovens, you're looking for what's called a half-sheet pan. A full sheet pan being the size for a commercial oven. Half-sheet is what you would use inside your American oven. I, of course, have a smaller oven, so I'm looking for something slightly smaller, like these. They're cheap, so I'm going to go ahead and get all three. They're about $6 a pop. Go ahead and just turn out your bread onto your surface. And you may have heard punch down. You don't want to do that. Just fold it a little bit, and all you're doing is redistributing the yeast. You want to be gentle here because you don't want to lose too many of those bubbles because we're not going to go ahead and bench rest it again. So I'm just going to go ahead and be as gentle as possible while spreading this out to about ½ inch thick. I mean, it's going to go basically double when you cook it, so it's up to you how thick you want your bread. So I'm going to be calling that about good right there. Now you could make shapes out of it, you could do whatever. Again, you're cooking at home, this is the benefits of doing so. Now, you could just leave it like this and the bread would be just delicious. However, I like to brush on a little bit of olive oil right on top to help kind of boost up the flavor. All right, so just pour it on and do this. You could put it in a bowl if you want and brush it on that way. I find this just as easy. Just be careful you don't put too much on. So nice, light coating, just enough. Help add additional flavor. Now, another nice addition is Parmesan cheese. Just go ahead, grate right on top. I've got a little microplaner here, so just go ahead and grate it right on top. If you're worried about distribution, grate it into a separate container, then sprinkle it on yourself. I'm not. I like it nice and dirty because, hey, it's rustic. People pay extra for that. You don't want a huge amount. You don't want this to be like cheese and some bread under it. Just enough to add that little extra notch in flavor. That's perfect. Now, me personally, you can go ahead and put this right in the oven. I like to give it about 5 minutes just so the yeast can make it a little bit more fluffy. If you like even, more fluffy, that's up to you. Go ahead and let it ride some more. That's why we're making this at home. So up to you. Some people, you can put it right away and it'd be a nice dense focaccia. I like it in between. So I'm going to go ahead and let it rise maybe 5-10 minutes. And then I'm going to go ahead and put it in the oven. After about 5-10 minutes, the bread's risen a nice little bit here. As I said, I like it a little bit fluffier than, quite as dense as some people do. So one thing I forgot to mention is that you can add a little bit of salt here just to kick up the flavor quotient. This is entirely optional. I know I have a high salt tolerance, so I like a little bit there. Just as a little extra something something. So go ahead and take this and put it right in your oven. Boom. And that's all you got to do. Let it go for about 15 minutes and you should have a nice, wonderful piece of bread. Now, one thing you want to do if you have an oven like mine that hot spots pretty bad, it's about halfway through you want to go ahead and flip the pan to allow even heating. All right, so it's been about 15 minutes, so let's go ahead and take our bread out the oven. See, it's nice and golden on the top on account of our olive oil. Now, how to tell if it's done? Well, you'll eventually learn it just by looking at it, but a good way is using that instant read thermometer I was telling you about and take its temperature. Now we're sitting at 193, about, maybe 194. That's great because you don't want to go over 200. You don't want to go less than 190 because 212 is the boiling point of water. So you want it still to be moist, and since focaccia bread is better as a moister bread, we like it, in that nice butter range. So the next thing you want to do is go ahead and take it off the pan, put it right on a cooling rack. Almost fell off. This is where these types of gloves come in handy. So just go ahead and pop it down and let it cool for about 30 minutes. I know this is right now is going to be the toughest thing ever because, that's a wonderful smell. But go ahead and let it cool for about 30 minutes and then cut into it and your patience will be rewarded. Did it work? Is it delicious? Let's find out. Let's go ahead and take a nice slice here off the end. Be careful not to cut my knife on the metal. Look at that. You see all the herbs in that. You see the nice structure. Not too overly bubbly, but definitely some nice fluffiness in there. You can feel it. Ooh, yeah. Ready? I dare you to get flavor like this out of a Mega Mart. Steak. Wonderful, delicious, perfect steak. Greatest snack ever made? Maybe. Greatest snack with a movie? Most definitely. Now, I like mine with salt, maybe some butter, maybe some balsamic vinegar even. Fresh herbs.